definitely feeling the love with the invite to open up this winter conference and kick off this great weekend with a message and stories that I think are really important. So thank you for having me. And thank you to NOFA Vermont for choosing to focus this conference with a theme like growing the good food movement. The key piece of that phrase being growing the movement, because all of us in this room, whether we're farmers, homesteaders, food advocates, food eaters, we are all a part of this larger movement, right? Whether we got into farming to heal the earth, to heal our health, to maybe make use of skills passed on from our families, or maybe to have jobs outside of the cubicle, or because we just can't get enough of soil science, compost, and veggies. Whatever the reason is that we all got into farming, and whether we realize it or not, we are all, without a doubt, a part of this incredible mass movement that is sweeping the nation right now. And that's exciting, right? It feels amazing to be a part of something so huge, to be a part of creating change together, all of us in our own small ways. We are changing mindsets. We're changing practices. We're changing the food system. We're changing the soil right beneath our feet. That's pretty powerful. So no wonder NOFA has gathered us all here this weekend to figure out how we can keep that momentum going, right? How we can keep growing, keep building that power. And how can we do that? How can we do that in a way that moves beyond just coming and enhancing our skills in organic farming, networking with each other? That's why many of us are here, and it's very important as well. But I think NOFA Vermont has gathered us here this weekend to dig a little deeper, to really kind of pause, zoom out, and reflect on our movement. Look at ourselves in the mirror and see if there are any areas where we can learn and change and grow. Reflect on our growth as a movement, not necessarily in size, but in effectiveness and in integrity. Maybe we're here to look at ourselves and see if we can be not just a movement for good food, but a movement for good. And that might make some of us think, okay, a movement for good, maybe a movement that's fair, a movement that's just. Fair and just in the way that we grow our food, in the way that we treat the land, in the way that we treat food workers, and whether that good food is reaching the families that need it. All of those pieces of the good food movement puzzle are on our plates, right? All those pieces and more, if we're willing to follow the food back far enough, to dig deep enough. So the question I pose to all of you is just how deep are we willing to dig when it comes to addressing inequities and injustices in the food system as well as our good food movement? Because inequities like food access, healthy food access, injustices like farm worker issues, those are real and urgent issues, but they only scratch the surface. And they don't define the communities that they exist in. Right? Farm workers or food deserts, those aren't the only roles for communities of color in the good food movement. Problems to be solved. And the solutions to these problems aren't cut and dry. Right? We're just scratching the surface if we think that paying an extra penny per pound for tomatoes addresses farm worker wage issues. Or dropping off our extra produce at the local food bank addresses healthy food access. We're really only hanging out in the topsoil, right? Not anywhere down near the deepest root, down near the bedrock of where the real complexities of these issues lie. Where we can really start to see and understand what's going on in these communities and what's kind of going on in the power dynamics that are at play, the people in power over our food system. So if we really want to grow as a movement and be a stronger, better movement, we've really got to do some digging. And when I started farming, which is a whole nother story that I'll get to in a minute, but when I started farming 6 years ago and became a part of this good food movement, it really didn't take me long to see just how bad this movement needed to do a little digging. Seeing the glaring inequities in our food system and within the movement itself was what really caused me to get out on the road and have a life-changing journey, really. It's what caused me to put down my pitchfork, pick up my pen and my tape recorder, and just listen. I thought, if we're not hearing from the communities that are marginalized by the food system and by the movement itself, the very same communities that are most heavily impacted by our broken system, then we're not hearing anything. If we truly want to be a good food movement, a movement that's doing good, an inclusive movement, a sustainable movement, one that will be around for good, right? Then we've got to start hearing all the voices at the table. We've got to make sure everybody's at the table. And if they're not, we've got to find out why, which might just mean going and knocking on their doors and asking to sit and listen at their tables. It might be time to hear some of those undertold stories so that we can really build understanding and develop real relationships so that we can grow into a better, stronger movement. And that's why I'm here today, to bring some of these untold stories into the room. I am author of The Color of Food: Stories of Race, Resilience, and Farming. And it is a book that focuses on farmers and food activists of color, specifically farmers and food activists from Black, Latina, Asian, and Native communities around the country. And through photographic storytelling, their stories give us insight into some of the barriers and issues that they see in the movement and in the food system. But their stories highlight the work that they're doing in their own communities, the work they're doing to push the movement forward. Work and sustainable practices that they've often been at for longer than the national movement has really taken hold. Work that is often largely overlooked by the larger movement, but vital in their communities. Their stories dig a little bit into the history of injustice and inequities for people of color, but also really highlight the resilience in these communities and how they're pushing forward and creating revolutionary change. And it's all happening around food and farming. And finally, their stories remind us of the different cultures and cultural foodways that exist, and teach us that without culture, there is no agriculture. So I'd like to share a few of these stories with you all, but before I do, I want to give you just a little bit of my own story, so you can understand how I came to write this book and how I came to be standing up here on this stage in front of all of you. Because I am not a public speaker. I am not an academic. I don't work for an organization. This project was not research mandated by some Food Justice Policy Council or by some diversity department in the USDA, although I do think it should be mandated that they all read the book. I'm not a student. I haven't been one in 10 years, so this isn't, my thesis research project. I am simply a brown girl who wanted to start farming. And this project really started for very personal reasons for me. And it did just start as a very simple photographic storytelling project, now turned book thanks to New Society Publishers. And as Enid mentioned, the book will be out in April, and I am taking pre-orders this weekend, so you can come see me. But the project really started for me because I felt it was simply necessary, vital, to better understand my own place in the food movement and to hopefully impact the larger movement. Staying up late at night on the farm I was working on in upstate New York 6 years ago when I started this project, I was trying to put all the pieces of the project together. I had no idea what I was doing. I had absolutely no money. But I had an incredible community of people behind me. And they were encouraging me to start one of these fundraising campaigns, crowdsourced fundraising. So I logged on to one of the Kickstarter websites, and within 60 days, I raised over $10,000. And then got matching grants on top of that. So that to me was overwhelming affirmation of the need for this project and the support to hear these kinds of stories. So after much outreach to farmers and food activists around the country who agreed to be interviewed, I was ready to hit the road. But I'm not sure I was quite ready for what would end up as a life-changing journey. So there I found myself out on the road in the hot summer of 2012 in my 1990 Oldsmobile station wagon with my camera, my tape recorder, and my notebook by my side. I began chuckling at myself because just 2 years prior, all I'd wanted to do was farm. I had quit my job as a policy advocate in Washington, D.C., to move on to an organic farm and frolic through the fields and tiptoe through the tulips, as everyone thinks organic farmers do, right? And now here I was as some self-appointed documentarian. My family had given up trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. 1 minute I'm in D.C., then I'm on a farm, now I'm in a 1990 Oldsmobile station wagon with all my belongings. But I knew I was just where I needed to be. I knew because I was on a quest, and I was searching for answers. This quote from Alice Walker really sums up my personal reasons for starting this project. Growing up as a mixed kid, raised by a white mother, I felt I was always trying to find my place in my mother's garden, right? As figuratively speaking, as a brown girl in white America, I was always looking for my place. And when I started farming, when I started getting into this good food movement, all of that just felt emphasized. Here I had joined this crunchy, majority white movement for organic food, farming, gardening, and I was really searching for my own garden, for my own place. I found myself literally barefoot on an organic farm on a commune in West Virginia, looking around and wondering what the hell I was doing there, where all the other people of color were. Don't get me wrong, I was in love with what I was doing. I had finally started doing what I'd been dreaming of back in D.C. when I was working as a healthcare and environmental policy advocate. And I'd left my job because the lights had suddenly gone off. I finally saw the elephant in the room of all of these issues I was passionate about, the environmental issues, social justice issues, healthcare. Food was at the center of all of it. How we grow our food, how food is distributed to the communities that need it. So I'd quit my job, I'd immersed myself in the good food movement. I was volunteering on farms, working at farmers markets, working for farmers, reading as many books as I could. And finally, I had done it. I had left my job, left the city, and was on this farm. And I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I was on the right path for myself. But at the same time, I could not ignore the extreme exclusiveness of the movement that I was seeing. In all of the spaces, at market, at the conferences I was attending, in the books I was reading, on the farms, the faces of the movement, the picture being painted, was that this was for white folks. Even in D.C., what's called the Chocolate City. You know, in some of the low-income communities of color, they were starting to address food justice by opening up community gardens, farmers markets, hosting food justice conferences. And that was all great, but the folks leading the discussions, the organizations that were setting up the farmers markets and the gardens, the people working at the gardens and the markets, they weren't from the communities, nor did they represent the communities racially, culturally. The farmers markets, often set up in predominantly Latina neighborhoods, didn't have staff that were bilingual, no culturally relevant foods. The urban gardens, the community gardens, the volunteers and staff there were having a hard time engaging the communities. And any exception to this, any gardens or organizations that were set up throughout DC that were community-led just weren't getting the same visibility. They weren't getting the same funding, they weren't getting the same support from the larger movement. So, as I witnessed all of this, along with feeling pretty alone out there on my organic farm in West Virginia, my giddiness about my newfound path really started to slip. I started to question my own place in the movement, whether I belonged there, whether I belonged out on the farm, whether this movement was really doing good. And if I felt that way, having the racially ambiguous skin tone that's been confusing curious Americans since 1983, if I felt that way, then surely other people of color felt that way. Frustrated and alone in a movement that was painting this exclusive picture, right? This is the face of the good food movement. And everywhere I was looking, in all the magazines talking about the Back to the Land movement sweeping the nation, young farmers coming back strong. And this one here, this is the young farmers of the Capitol Food Shed. That's DC. That's the DC area, the Chocolate City. The picture was clear. Communities of color were not being represented. But it's not just about the media or the picture being painted, right? But if we are being left out of the literal picture, what else are we being left out of? Are the best farmers markets, Whole Foods, organic grocery stores opening up in our communities? Are we being left out of the agricultural system itself? Could that have something to do with our low numbers as farmers? Let's take a look at that picture by looking at the numbers. According to the 2012 USDA agricultural census, 96% of America's farmers are white. Only 13% are women, so that means majority white men. That doesn't exactly represent our country. Maybe those in power it represents, but not our people, our communities, right? 1/3 of the US population is minority. And that number is growing. In about 15 to 20 years, the minority is predicted to be the majority. So that disparity is not sustainable, right? And here in Vermont, though the population looks a little different, being a state with the second smallest minority population in the country at just 5%, things are changing. Particularly the Black and Hispanic community here in Vermont has doubled since the year 2000. And the population growth in the state overall has been majorly driven by the growth of the minority population. You guys know this, you live here. There's also a large refugee community growing here in Vermont. And as Enid mentioned, a large community from Mexico coming up as migrant farm workers. But particularly the refugee population, 1 in 4 African Americans in Vermont were born in Africa. So the Somali, Rwandan, Sudanese communities are really growing here, as well as Tibetan, Burmese, Bhutanese, Iraqi and Bosnian communities. And there are some really great programs, like the Refugee Resettlement Program and the Association of Africans Living in Vermont, that are not only helping these refugees transition to new lives in America, but they're tapping into growing the diversity in the agricultural makeup in Vermont, which, as we can see here, is quite homogeneous. 99%, right? These programs that are kind of changing the makeup of farmers here in Vermont, they're building on programs that encourage farming for the refugee communities, while also ensuring that these communities are building economic growth, maintaining non-Western diets as they can grow their foods from their home countries, selling produce at market, building community with each other, building stronger communities, securing access and food access in low-access communities, and also facilitating some therapy, right, from the trauma that is created during leaving your own country and coming to a new country. All of that is happening around farming. I was reading about the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. They have a program, the New Farms for New Americans, and it sounds really great. Right here in Burlington, helping refugee communities navigate the farm business model here. They're selling produce at market and creating platforms from which they can launch their own social enterprises and independent farm businesses. So clearly, things in Vermont are changing. And this growth and diversity, not only in the overall population, but in the population of farmers, will have a big impact on the state's food system and the good food movement here. And it seems it already is. If these farmers are already introducing new crops and foods at market, introducing new skills into the agricultural industry. I was also reading about the Vermont Goat Collaborative, an initiative working to introduce goat meat to the state and to the country as a whole. In fact, one of the organizations in the collaborative talked about wanting to make Vermont the #1 goat meat producer in the country. And they're working with refugee communities and learning from refugee communities who come from countries where goat meat production is a lot more common than it is here. And right now in the States, goats are all the rage. On a serious note, the goat meat industry is the fastest growing livestock industry in the country right now. And it's primarily been driven by demand and a growth in popularity due to the cultural population shift that we're seeing. So some of the farmers that I interviewed really saw that shift coming down the pike and are capitalizing on that increasing demand. Renard Turner and his wife, Shanette, raised myotonic goats on their 94-acre farm in Charlottesville, outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And if you're at all familiar with Charlottesville, Virginia, you know that it's really growing into quite the foodie town. A lot of chefs are flocking there, great restaurants are opening up, great food festivals are happening, and there's a food hub there that's sourcing from a lot of the local small farmers. Well, Renard and Shanette also have an organic produce and egg operation, and they're selling a lot of their products to the food hub, as well as to some of the local restaurants. But their goat meat is the heart of their business. And their farm is called Vanguard Ranch. And they sell the goat meat to some of the local stores and restaurants, but they really manage to sell direct to consumer, making about $38 a pound. Yeah. How are they doing that? They're processing the meat into added value products in their certified commercial kitchen, which is on wheels. Renard and Shanette make organic goat burgers and curry goat kebabs, and they sell them at festivals, concerts, and events throughout the region. This direct marketing strategy really works for them where they are because, as I said, Charlottesville is this burgeoning foodie town, and there's a lot of vineyards in the area, so there's always these great wine and food festivals, seasonal events like Monticello, great summer concerts, and they have people lining up for their goat products. That's how they can get top dollar per pound. And they're extremely successful in doing this. They've been doing it for over 10 years, and Renard's been farming for about 20 years. So we had plenty to talk about when I was there for my 3-day visit in this regard. The success of his farm, his experience farming, his love for Mother Earth news that has gone on since his childhood, his teenage years. But what we talked about most in the 3 days I was there was how Renard is constantly working to push the organic industry and the movement in Charlottesville to be more inclusive. He now sits on the board of the Virginia Biological Farming Association, but he says that was a very long road to get there as a black farmer. And he said there's still quite a long road ahead. He talked about the difficulty also of breaking into the movement for the black community. He explained this to me as I followed him around with my tape recorder in one hand and a fencing tool in the other, because I could never get farmers to sit down for too long for an interview. So we would always work as we talked. And he explained this issue of why it was not easy for black farmers to break into the leadership level of the movement, but also how it was not easy to get black farmers recruited into agriculture, organic agriculture. He said, "I call it anti-agricultural blacklash. Black folks are still equating farming with slavery. And though our people do carry a painful past with agriculture, still painful today with discrimination from the USDA that has ended in lawsuits like the Pigford case, that's real and we have to recognize it, but farming, owning land, and running our own farm businesses, that creates independence, self-sufficiency. We are doing this for self. My wife and I believe what we are advocating for is larger than just farming. It's a return to agrarianism, which for the black community can mean a lifestyle that is about choice and can be the basis for restructuring our community in a way that creates value and is lasting and inheritable." Another goat farmer in the South, Sandra Simone, did inherit her family's land and eventually that live-off-the-land lifestyle that Renard talked about. Her land was purchased by her great-grandfather in the late 1800s after arriving in Alabama from Mozambique. Land acquisition at that time, when African Americans had no rights and very few assets after emancipation, was not easy. But by 1910, black land ownership was around 15 million acres. However, with the introduction of Jim Crow, the KKK, and the economic depression, many black families fled north to the cities in what was known as the Great Migration to escape the South's extreme racism and to find work. In the meantime, they left behind family land that was often lost to developers or taken in legal loopholes. Sandra's family went through this. Her parents had left Alabama, and she was raised in Southern California, dreaming of being a jazz singer. But when she got married and had kids, her husband pushed her to look into her family's land and hold on to it, because he believed what Ralph Page is always preaching, that land is the only real wealth in this country, and if we don't own any, we'll be out of the picture. Now, Ralph Page is the head of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, one of the oldest and largest farmer cooperatives in the South that has been fighting against black land loss for decades. So most of Sandra's family land was divided up and sold, and Sandra couldn't do much to stop it because of the tricky heirs property laws that are often the culprit of black family land loss throughout the South. But she was able to save some 100 acres of it in Talladega County, Alabama, where after losing her husband to cancer, she decided to stay there alone, dedicated to keeping the land and farming it. She raises meat goats as well, and operates a small CSA farm. She was recently named Farmer of the Year by the Alabama NRCS, and she's a certified organic farmer and a member of the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. And if you haven't heard of this network, nicknamed SAFON, you should really look them up. They're an amazing network of over 120 black farmers across 8 southern states and throughout the Caribbean, all certified organic farmers due to the support and training of the organization. Cynthia Hayes, who I call my Mama C, and Dr. Bandele, both farmers themselves, started the organization in 2006 because, as Cynthia puts it, there was a need to find a way for black farmers to save their land, and I saw the organic industry booming, so it just made sense. These are some of the saffron farmers, just a few of them, that I interviewed, and I did interview many. And while all of their stories were different, many talked about how growing organically just made sense because it was the way their families had grown ever since before organic became a thing, right? Many of these farmers were older, in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they talked about how the disconnect from these farming skills that they grew up with and that has happened in today's generation in their communities due to, in part, a lot of the land loss their communities were seeing, was a culprit of the ailing health in their communities. And many other communities I interviewed talked about the same thing, about how their struggles with land loss were the same, and how this loss of land, along with the loss of their culturally relevant foods and farming culture, was impacting their health that is disproportionately worse in their communities. Communities like Robeson County, North Carolina, one of the poorest counties in the country, and home to the largest Native American population east of the Mississippi. 40% of the county is Native American, predominantly Lumbee, but also Cherokee, Iroquois, and Tuscarora, like Beverly here. Beverly Collins Hall, the one in the middle, is a farmer in Robeson County where diet-related illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, and obesity are rampant. Beverly grew up on her family's farm and first worked as a home health nurse before starting her organization, American Indian Mothers, and their farm, Three Sisters Farm. And as we sat in the living room when I was visiting Beverly, she told me why she started this organization that was now doing so much for the community in the way of food, farming, and nutrition. She said, "I watched as the elders were forced to choose between buying food or buying medicine. And that's not right. Our elders never used to lack for anything. And the food they are provided at these food banks is not the food of our people. It's not the food they're used to, and it's making them sick. We've lost who we are as a people. When our land was taken from us, they made our land sick, our rivers sick, and now the food is killing us. We've got to clean it up, and Native Americans can show you how." Beverly has been running American Indian Mothers for 12 years. And as an organization, they started their own food bank, supplied with culturally relevant foods and fresh foods grown on their farm, the Three Sisters Farm, which is named after the Iroquois concept of growing beans, corn, and squash together, 3 crops that work well together in the garden and complement each other nutritionally. They also run youth programs on the farm, nutritional education programs, host storytelling and cultural pride events on the farm, and support local Native farmers who are facing obstacles in the USDA system. Not far from Beverly, in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, live the eastern band of the Cherokee Nation. And right outside of what was once their 11 million acre homeland is where they are now, but the 11 million acres is today the Smoky Mountain National Park. The Cherokee now live on a much smaller piece of land. Their reservation sits right outside of the park, where tourists pass through to buy Cherokee trinkets and gamble at the casinos on their way in and out of the park. My husband and I, who had joined me on the road at this point, met with Kevin Welch of the Center for Cherokee Plants. Kevin explained to us the definition of agriculture for his tribe. As we sat in the shade with the birds chirping at our backs, Kevin spoke so softly that we had to scoot our chairs up to hear him. Cherokee, he started, are the original agriculturists of this land. We have been growing food here for thousands of years, but we are forest people too, which means we hunt and harvest wild foods. This is a part of agriculture for us. It is part of our culture. Kevin talked about the loss of what was once their harvesting and hunting grounds and is now the national park. He talked about the misunderstanding of the effects of harvesting and the beneficial role it can play in the ecosystem if done properly, the way his people had been doing for thousands of years. Part of his work at the Center for Cherokee Plants is preserving wild Cherokee plants. And they are a seed bank. Those are wild onions, otherwise known as ramps. They are a seed bank that is focused on propagating and saving heirloom Cherokee plants, many that were cultivated and many that were typically wild harvested, like the wild onions, throughout Cherokee history. But as Kevin says, they're a little different in being a seed bank in that they don't just sit on the seeds, they give them away. Kevin propagates a variety of plants, and they give them out as garden kits every year to residents on the Cherokee Reservation. 700 garden kits a year go out to the families who then start their own gardens with them. With the poverty level and the health rate in the Cherokee community so low, this is directly affecting health and food access in the community. Kevin explains, "My research doesn't go into a book somewhere or sit on a shelf. It goes directly into the homes, onto the tables, and into the bellies of this community, where it belongs." Kevin and his wife, Sarah, also take a mobile classroom around the reservation and support folks with garden education, storytelling, nutrition education. And Sarah says it makes all the difference that the teacher and the one pushing these kinds of initiatives in the Cherokee community is Cherokee and not from outside of the community. She explains, there's just a different connection that's happening.